The most useful technique, and what I got from this is that there's a concept that's called speed writing, where you just kind of like writing, they say, from the right part of your brain, the creative part of your brain. And you just sit down, you turn on a timer for 5 minutes, and you just write. You can't stop typing. You just keep going, even if it's garbage. If it's, if you can't think of anything, you're like, I just can't think of anything to say right now. And you just keep typing and typing until ideas come.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode, as well as free training on creativity, over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor. I'm delighted to have on the show today Diane R. Gehart. She is a Ph.D., she's an author, an award-winning professor of counseling and family therapy at California State University, Northridge, as well as a practicing psychotherapist. Her new book combines wit, wisdom, and a touch of sweetness to help you uncover playful ways to transform any aspect of your life. It's called Mindfulness for Chocolate Lovers, a lighthearted way to stress less and savor more each day. And in it, she offers a recipe of surprisingly efficient and fun ways to increase your daily dose of joy. It's my great pleasure to have Diane with us today. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much for having me.
So share with us all what's happening in your world at the moment.
Well, I'm a university professor. So right now we are in the thick of midterms, honestly. That is kind of where my focus has been for the last week.
And how did you get into the space of psychotherapy? What did you have kind of family members that were doctors or therapists before, or where did it all begin for you?
Oh, absolutely not. My dad thought I was insane for being a therapist. No, I am one of the, I think, few people I know of who, from a very young age, I think I got to high school, I heard about what psychology was, and I'm like, I want to do that. And I kind of had a straight, well, I guess it wasn't totally a straight path. Now I got to back up, don't I? Because along my journey, I did, when I was in starting my undergraduate career, I had an opportunity to take some elective courses, and I took a course in Buddhism. And I will tell you, when I went to sign up for that course, I got very poor advising because I was, first year in my college, and it was an advanced course. So everyone in the course was already speaking Chinese and Japanese, and I was not. I did get a B in Buddhism, and that is, I just have to like
Buddhism.
I did get a B in Buddhism. I know. I just have to put it out there. That's the honest to God truth there. But I just fell in love with those ideas. And ever since, I have been looking at ways to kind of, understand psychology, both from Eastern and a Western perspective.
Now, what made you this particular area that you're kind of getting known for around mindfulness? I mean, we kind of think of these Eastern, you mentioned like the difference between the Eastern and Western perspectives on things. Are we now starting to see a time where these kind of come together? They're kind of less at conflict, and there's more kind of harmony between these different ways of looking at how we think and how we feel?
Absolutely. And there really has been a huge shift in the last 2 decades, I would say. When I first entered the field, God, do I need to reveal how old I am? Let's just say I started, in 1988, studying Buddhism and psychology at the university. And I will tell you that my psychology professors would not allow me to do my master's, or my thesis on anything that had to do with Buddhist psychology. It was just crazy from them. And it was not professional. It was, just absolute nonsense. And we've really come a long ways. And it really is thanks to Jon Kabat-Zinn. He is a researcher at the University of Massachusetts who, about 40 years ago, kind of brought the concept of mindfulness in to the world of behavioral health to really treat patients who weren't responding in physical medicine in terms of pain or just chronic conditions. And he really separated the religious base and focused on just the practice of mindfulness, really kind of separating it from the Buddhist roots, and started doing research and really had some phenomenal results. So basically, the field of psychology had to pause and say, hey, there's something to this that we were missing.
So why you come up with this book, Mindfulness for Chocolate Lovers, a light-hearted way to stress less and savor more each day. Before we kind of get into some of the lessons in the book, why do you think now it feels like we're in a time of this feels more stressed? People, what's kind of going on in maybe the zeitgeist and more generally that's making us have more stress? And you're seeing obviously people taking more drugs and things to kind of deal with it as well, and going obviously having more kind of therapy. What's kind of going on in our society?
Yeah, you're right. You're really noticing an important pattern there, James, because I think, mindfulness is this antidote to this overstressed, overstimulated culture that we've kind of created. And a lot of it is coming through technology. We're always connected. We're always in dialogue. There is more information coming at us. And it's got this weird addictive quality. It's just like hard to turn off your, whatever it is for you, your news feed, your Twitter feed, whatever it is, your email. It's just hard to disconnect. There is this strange quality to it where it's just very hard to unplug. And the honest to God truth is our nervous systems are not built for the type of technology we have. When my son was young, he would ask, Mom, why can't I have, unlimited iPad time? And I said, Michael, and maybe in 1,000 years from now, the human nervous system will evolve to be able to take in this much constant stimulation. But our nervous systems are really designed to be in nature most of the time and to have very limited stimulation, and certainly not what most of us are experiencing on a daily basis. And so the practice of mindfulness is a natural antidote, because it is a practice where you kind of focus on just one thing in the present moment, and you quiet the mind, and it naturally triggers the relaxation response. And I always like to say the relaxation response is a physiological response that truly is the opposite of the stress response, but it's not, having a margarita on a beach is not what, the relaxation response is. It's what most of us will experience only when we're falling asleep at night. And so until our nervous systems learn to adapt to the level of stimuli we have constantly, day in, day out, humans are going to have to put practices like mindfulness into their daily routine intentionally, because otherwise just the stream of stimulation coming at us is unstoppable.
It also feels today where maybe this is a generational thing where, I guess going back to the 50s, you would have had the Jack Kerouacs who were very interested in this area. And then you had it again, I guess, in the late 60s, 70s, kind of the hippie movement and all those things again. It seems to be it's kind of coming back, and people are talking about mindfulness, but they're talking it from a perspective not so much in the spiritual sense, but the almost kind of what it's doing to our brain. There's almost those kind of millennials, they're attracted to it because it is that you can, from a scientific perspective, you can see the difference it's making in people's lives.
Absolutely. And, I've been a therapist for, let's just say, at least 3 decades. And it is the first time in my career where there are like brain images about what I do and how it affects people. It's very compelling. And definitely it has the mindfulness, especially as I said before, how it entered the field of mental health. They intentionally separated it from the religious roots so that, quite honestly, so they can get grant funding to do research. So it has been separated from that. And it happens to be a mental health intervention that's so easily research study, do the brain scans on it. And so it's extremely compelling.
So there's that expression in Buddhism, when you wash the dishes, being kind of mindfulness of different things. And so often when we think of mindfulness, might think of someone kind of sitting on on a pillow, breathing, looking at a candle perhaps as well. But you kind of take it from a different perspective as well, and you relate it to chocolate. So tell us about that. Can eating chocolate, can that be a mindfulness experience?
Absolutely. And it's actually and a surprisingly, effective and efficient meditation. So mindfulness, in its most simple form, there are lots of definitions floating out there, but it's really about intentionally, on purpose, focusing your mind on a single thing that is happening in the present moment. It can be water and soap suds, like you're saying, when you're doing the dishes. It can be focusing on your breath, the most classic form, or it can be something that you're eating. And while you're experiencing whatever this one present moment experience is, you're just quieting that inner chatter in the mind. And it's real important, I think, for everyone to understand that you never actually totally silence that inner chatter. I like to joke that, when you're no longer having thoughts, you're either in a coma or you're dead. And that's not really why we practice mindfulness. It is to just quiet that chatter. It ebbs and it flows. And that's the process. That's what it's about. And so when you're focusing, so the classic eating meditation, and this is a very gentle way to introduce people to mindfulness, the classic eating meditation that Jon Kabat-Zinn, who I mentioned earlier, he had people eat a raisin, which is a fairly neutral object. I think for most of us, don't have strong emotions. Some people do, but most people don't. To just really mindfully eat a raisin, and you notice the colors, the sight, something you just take for granted, don't notice much in your everyday life. But when you intentionally shift your focus, your relationship to it shifts. And so when I first started teaching mindfulness about 20 years ago, I, took my cue from Kabat-Zinn, and I'd travel around to go speak, and I'd bring little boxes of raisins to pass out so people could do this exercise. And I'll be honest, what happened was sometimes I would arrive and those little boxes would be crushed in my suitcase. And so I said, what could I do instead? And I'm an avid chocolate lover. And one day I was, mindfully eating chocolate. I'm like, this would travel well. So I went ahead and I started using chocolate to teach mindfulness. And what's interesting is because chocolate has more emotional pull for many of us. Some of you either hate it or you love it. And it's, for some people, it has a connotation of being, sinful, but also this amazing pleasure. And so there's all these mixed emotions. And so you can use this exercise to this meditation to kind of begin working with more difficult emotions. And so it really has a lot more to it. It sounds kind of funny and silly, but it invites you to work with some difficult emotions.
So in this, as an example, then you would take that bite of chocolate and kind of think about, are you thinking at this stage, like, what is it doing in the mouth, the taste, the texture? Is it going beyond? Are you trying to go beyond thinking?
So let me just take you through the meditation real briefly. And so, no, I actually torture you a little bit more than that. So I know. So there is some, I begin by I like to work with wrapped chocolates because it puts in the sense of sound. But, you begin by just looking maybe at your wrapped chocolate, just noticing the light, how it reflects. If they're letters or words or symbols, try to just see them as lines rather than putting all of the meaning of words or the symbol onto it. And then as you unwrap it, to just listen to the sound that wrapper makes. And again, you do the same thing again. You can smell it, you can feel the texture. And then a very important piece is to bring the chocolate up to your mouth for a moment, but to not take a bite. And to just pause and notice what kind of thoughts and feelings start to go through your mind. So often there's frustration, there can be anticipation. If you don't like chocolate, there's probably dread. And the goal is to just notice those thoughts without judging them and without clinging to them. Just let them kind of come and let them, pass away, and but notice what your mind is doing, and the different thoughts and feelings and judgments that go through your mind. And then as you take a bite, the challenge shifts a little bit, and the goal is to then try to taste the chocolate without labeling it as good or bad, without comparing it to something you had before. whether, you like it or dislike it, and just try to notice the sensations without judging them. And you begin to create this little space between your lived experience and the judgment of what's going on. And our minds are constantly judging good, bad, good, bad. It comes from the part of the brain that's trying to keep us safe. So it's always determining whether things are safe or unsafe, which quickly translates to, good or bad in our minds. And so by just pausing that kind of instinctual, knee-jerk, lightning-fast judgment that we all have throughout our days, it allows you then to translate this to everyday experiences where you can have experiences without us necessarily judging what's going on. And it allows you to have new interpretations, new thoughts, and new experiences around difficult situations.
So do you notice any difference when you do this exercise with men versus women? And the reason I ask you that question is I remember going to or chatting to someone that worked, I'm trying to remember the name of the candy company that's based up in Sacramento. They make these little jellies. They have different flavors.
Like, was it Ghirardelli or that San
No,
Francisco?
it was the one, I think it was actually Reagan. Reagan used to love these little candies.
Jelly Bellies.
Jelly Bellies. That was the name of the brand. And I remember talking to the vice president of marketing. And I said, like, who is your average customer? And I thought it would be children. And he said, no, it's not children. And it's primarily women. And I said, well, why is it more women than men? And he said, well, men, when they'll just take their hand, put a whole bunch of these candies, put them in their mouth and swallow them and don't actually spend. But women, if you watch a lot of the women that eat these particular candies, they'll pick up each one individually and listen and taste it and like the different flavors, because they all have different flavors. So do you notice when doing this activity, this mindfulness practice with women, do one sex prefer it to the other, or does anything happen there?
Well, I think there's some different experiences in terms of, so men, using what you just described, there is this tendency for them to just be slowing down and paying attention to something this carefully. For a lot of men, that's the new experience. For women, women usually have, because they're often watching their weight and their calorie intake more closely. And so for them, they're noticing just the push and pull they have around, eating chocolate. They enjoy it, but then there's it's this guilty pleasure. So they're struggling more with the emotions, where for the men, it's kind of like awakening to, oh, I'm normally on autopilot. I don't notice this. So yeah, there's definitely, I haven't done a research study, so I can't give you numbers. But I definitely have noticed that trend.
What about in terms of mindfulness more generally? When I speak to people that work, let's say in a lot of the kind of traditional creative professions, whether they're authors or they're entrepreneurs building something, for example, some of them worry about doing mindfulness exercise because they actually like the little bit of them that they might call the crazy. The bit that is the monkey mind, they might say in Buddhism, and that they worry by doing some type of mindfulness or meditation practice, it will dull that part that they feel is useful to their creative process. What is your take on that from the work that you do?
Absolutely not, because, I can see where that fear will come from, but the truth is you can do, your 5, 10, 15 minutes of mindfulness, and right afterwards you can have your monkey mind right back. It's right there, sitting there waiting for you. But I think with creative types, one of the things it does, and with the chocolate meditation, the part where you try to eat it without judging it, what that does for creative processes, it's creating that space. And so much of creativity is being able to step back and look at something maybe in a different way than someone else might, putting things together, new ideas together in a different way than others have. So this creative and that critical voice is probably the most poisonous thing we have, that inner critic, to our creative process. Oh, that's not good. Oh, that's not going to work. So-and-so's not going to like that. And that just kills creativity. And so the process of mindfulness, by kind of quieting the mind, you're not really quieting, you're putting pauses in your thinking, but it allows for, the whole point is to have new thoughts come and to allow space for new ideas to come in. And I use this idea very similarly in psychotherapy, because when we have a problem, we're stuck. we can't think of a way out. And so by putting pauses in our automated thinking and our kind of how we think in this, we tend to get into ruts. Whether it's you're having a personal problem, an emotional problem, relationship problem, or you're feeling, stuck in your terms of creativity. And so that pause that you get, that space you get in your mind, I think is very fertile for allowing the creative process to come through.
And as you said, it reminds me that there was a book that came out a number of years ago. I think it was called The Diamond Cutter. It was about a jeweler in New York who suddenly got very interested in Tibetan Buddhism and meditation. And the one thing I remember from the book, there's something in Tibetan Buddhism where they tell you to pause 5 times a day. I think it was 5 times, or maybe 7 times a day. But it was just that period of what you were just mentioning there, systematically kind of adding pauses in. And like today we have our iPhones, so we can kind of set it to remind us to stop and to take a pause. But you're also adding that physical nature by having that chocolate.
Yes.
Mind you, but so just for any listeners, we're not advocating probably that you eat chocolate 5 times a day, because that's probably not going to help matters.
No.
So in your own the own work that you do as a psychotherapist, as a teacher, as a writer as well, has there been a time when you worked on something and you've given it your heart and your soul, but it hasn't really worked out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what was the lesson that you took from that experience?
Oh my God, that happens all the time as a writer. It's called writer's block, isn't it? So yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that one of the techniques I learned for dealing with writer's block, because what happens is you sit down to start writing and then you start judging. You're like, oh, this is trash. This is awful. This isn't, what I wanted. It's whatever. No one's going to, whatever. Whoever you think in your mind is not going to like it. And that critical voice just starts in, and then you feel more and more helpless and hopeless. And I think the most useful technique and what I got from this is that there's a concept that's called speed writing, where you just kind of like writing, they say, from the right part of your brain, the creative part of your brain. And you just sit down, you turn on a timer for 5 minutes, and you just write. You can't stop typing. You just keep going, even if it's garbage. If it's, if you can't think of anything, you're like, I just can't think of anything to say right now. And you just keep typing and typing until ideas come. And the idea is that some days you're going to delete everything you just wrote, and other days you're not. But it keeps this kind of channel open. It keeps you just writing a little bit every day. And what I learned is that it's okay. Some days it's going to be more garbage than good, and other days real brilliance happens. And just trusting that there's just an ebb and flow that I cannot totally control. And that you just keep, you don't give up because you had even a couple bad days, bad week, whatever it is. There's a rhythm. You just keep going back to the process, and it's going to ebb and flow. I don't control it necessarily. And that's also something I think you get from the mindfulness really highlights that there are days you're going to focus more easily than others, and that's okay. And what they call acceptance is what you build through that practice of mindfulness that you can also bring to the creative process. And sometimes you're going to create things you love and others hate. Sometimes you're going to create things that others love and you may not like so much. And so just being okay with learning to accept that that's the process, to move with it rather than fight it.
So it sounds like almost like that idea of not attaching, kind of streaming, don't edit, trying to at the same time just kind of get those ideas out onto the page. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Exactly. And that's been what's been a big lesson for me, because I think sometimes you think, well, professional writer, I just be able to sit down and it should just come flowing, right? And yeah, some days it does, and some days it just doesn't.
Talking about lessons learned, in the process of writing and researching for this book, was there a key insight or light bulb moment in your kind of creative journey of getting this ready and putting it out into the world?
Absolutely. There's actually a chapter in the book called Befriending Problems. And that was it comes out of Buddhist psychology, where it's this concept where in the West, we see problems as something to solve. We have battles with our problems. We fight. And the Buddhists are like, what if you don't go to war with it? What if you befriend the problem, become curious about it? and bringing kind of a curious rather than a combative stance to whatever struggles are going on in our lives, I think has really shifted. I don't, I'm also a psychotherapist, so I help people with their problems for a living. That's kind of what I do. Um, and shifting that perspective, it is slowly, taking root in the mental health world. For example, in cognitive therapy, which I'll be honest, I never felt worked all that great for my clients, because the old paradigm was really about find that irrational belief and replace it. Well, let me tell you, the mind does not do delete so well. It just really doesn't. So, it's like telling you to think about, don't think about pink elephants. Well, what are you going to think of? Of course, the pink elephant. So this concept of befriending problems, becoming curious, open, wondering, accepting that problems are in our lives, that, mental health doesn't mean you never have a problem ever again. But I think that concept of not going to war with all our problems and befriending them, learning how to move gracefully with them, has probably been both professionally the biggest shift in my life as well as personally.
I love that. That reminds me a little bit. I think it was either Julia Cameron or the lady that wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh, yes.
Her name was
Elizabeth Gilbert.
Elizabeth Gilbert. Yeah, I think she talked about that of that stage of the, I guess which relates to kind of imposter syndrome, when she'd be writing something and the little voice on her right shoulder would come in saying, you really think that's good? Kind of all those little self-talk, negative self-talk. And then she would mentally turn to this voice that was sitting on her shoulder saying, thank you, friend. Thank you for coming and joining me at this time. And I know you think you're doing what's best for me, but I think I'm going to be fine. I can get on with this.
Yeah.
So as you said, befriending your problem, befriending that sometimes negative voice that you have in your head.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how it shifts. If you shift your relationship to it, it just like new possibilities open up that you never imagined before.
So as we shift gears a little bit here, is there an online resource or a tool or an app that you find very useful in the work that you do as a psychotherapist and as a writer and as a researcher?
Well, honest to God, what I use is my little insight timer. It's a meditation app that you can choose all these different gongs. And so, but I use it to write. I do my 5-minute time writing and has this beautiful gong, and then I go for my 5 minutes, and then it gongs at the end. And I use it with my kids to get them on, doing on to the next task. I use it with my students to give them a warning that if you don't stop talking soon, I'm going to take points off for going too long in your presentation. So I use my little meditation, my little meditation bell that's in my phone, for all sorts of things. And somehow there's just something about that peaceful gong that it always reminds me to kind of just take a breath and take that little pause. But I use it with lots of different people in lots of different situations in my life.
Great insight time. We'll put that on the show notes here as well. And what about if you were to recommend one book, not one of your own books, but a book by another author, and also one album or record that our listeners should check out? What would those be?
Well, I think everyone needs to have some book that whenever you get into that negative headspace, that it inspires you, it brings you back to hope, it brings you back to a lighter perspective. And for me, that is the writings of Rumi, mystic Sufi poet. And I go to my Rumi, and that poetry, for some reason, it always kind of is able to break me out of whatever negative headspace you get into. So I think everyone needs to have something like that, because life ebbs and flows, and there are just days where you need a little hope, a little inspiration. And I think it's, and it can be anything that you find that inspires you. And it's, I think, so important to our mental health for everyone to have that. Now, in terms of an album or a record, I have to admit, I stream all my music and I listen to radio stations. But I will tell you what I do when I listen to music is to be very particular about the message in the music. And, as a psychotherapist, I like to joke a lot that there's so many songs out there that are actually like the honeymoon stage of an abusive relationship. So I thumb down all of those songs, and I really focus on songs that lift me up, and have a positive message. And I have, 2 young boys who are my eldest is, going on 11, getting into, finding his own music. And I caution him because a lot of teen music can sometimes be dark and have dark themes. And, there's something about music that shifts our moods. And so, not that to never listen to a sad song or, a song that's a lot about pain, but sometimes I think if you listen to too much of that, again, my music is what keeps me buoyant, that keeps me having a positive perspective in life. And so just making sure that you think about what the words are saying and to notice how the music affects your mood. And does it lift you up, or does it let your mind kind of run off into darker places? And I think we have so much media coming at us all the time, and to really be critical and thoughtful and to really notice, whether it's your Facebook feed, your Snapchat, your Instagram, is it lifting you up? Or is it creating more stress and worry in your life? And I think we really have to be very vigilant and police what media comes into our life to make sure that it lifts us.
And is there one artist in particular you think that epitomizes that of, pretty much you can listen to anything they produce because it might not shy away from the kind of tough times, but there's a joyfulness, like in your book, there's a joyfulness message that's kind of going throughout it.
Absolutely. So for me, it's Jason Mraz.
Yeah,
is just he has a lot. I mean, I can't say I've listened to all of his music, but most of the music that he produces helps me be hopeful and happy and upbeat and have a positive outlook on life. So that's the station I stream.
We need some more of that. Let's imagine then tomorrow, Diane, you wake up tomorrow morning and you have to start from scratch. So you have all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you and you know no one. What would you do? How would you restart things?
Well, my creative process, there's another step that I didn't mention, is I love to run in the morning and then write. And it's funny, when you do that on a regular basis, when you're running, like my best ideas don't come when I'm sitting in front of a screen. They come when I'm running on a trail. And then I come home immediately and do my 5 minutes of writing. Sometimes that's all I get. But that process of running for me, then writing, and I do that right brain, I call it speed writing, the fast, and I just write whatever comes out. And then when I have larger chunks of time, I go back and put the scholarly scientific, piece behind it, which I have to do for my nonfiction and my professional writing. And so it's this kind of multi-phase process. And for me, that recipe has been very effective in kind of getting me to write. And it's just a little bit every day. And yes, when you get the big chunks, you can fill in a lot of the pieces, but it's to keep my writing fun and alive. What I have learned is I have to just write from the right side of the brain, be in a good state of mind when I do that, so that the writing kind of flows that way for me.
Run and write. I love that idea. I think I've done a little bit of that before. And one of the things I always found is I was running and I had an idea, my pacing would pick up because I needed to get back quickly enough in order to write it down before I forget it with my usually terrible memory. But thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where is the best place for people to go and learn more about you, get a copy of the book, learn about some of the other things that you're doing?
So I have my website, which is dianegehart.com, and that is DIANEGEHART.com. And then the book actually has its own website with lots of free resources, which is mindfulnessforchocolatelovers.com.
Well, wonderful book, wonderful topic. Thank you so much, Diane, for coming on the show today. I wish you all the best, and thank you for coming on, sharing about your creative life.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.